The room was packed. Hot lights beat down from above, casting long shadows across the carpeted floor of the House Oversight Committee chamber. The air was tense, thick with the scent of overbrewed coffee, perfume, and political anxiety. Reporters shifted in their seats like restless birds, pens poised, cameras waiting for the spark. It was one of those days in Washington. Everyone could feel it. A showdown was coming. At the center of it all sat two women, each commanding, each formidable, and each with something to prove. Kellyanne Conway, the once whispered strategist behind Donald Trump's ascent, now stood with the cool precision of someone who'd walked through every storm Washington could throw. Clad in a sleek navy dress and pearls that gleamed like warning signs, she projected the practiced calm of a chess master lining up her pieces. Her voice, when it came, was measured but sharp, like a scalpel used not to heal but to cut. Across from her, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett adjusted her chair with a slow, deliberate motion. Her hair was pinned back tight, but a single curl had escaped, dancing along her temple. She wore a fire-red blazer that seemed to challenge the very walls around her. But her eyes, those eyes were a battlefield all their own, focused, defiant, but also wounded. She had come too far, fought too hard, to be dismantled by sound bites and smirks. This wasn't just a political debate. This was personal, for both of them. The confrontation began quietly, like the early tremors of a quake. Kellyanne reached into her binder, pages rustling like dry leaves in a cold wind. She quoted numbers, historical trends, economic forecasts. Her voice carried authority and a note of condescension that prickled the air. "Congresswoman Crockett," she said with a thin smile, "with all due respect, the facts don't care about your feelings. Let's talk about the economic impact of your proposed housing reform. Do you even have projections that show how you'll pay for this? Or are we still operating on slogans and vibes?" There was a slight murmur in the chamber, half amusement, half anticipation. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She leaned forward slowly, hands folded, as if she were contemplating the gravity of the earth itself. "You want to talk facts?" she said, her voice low, steady. "Let's talk about the families in South Dallas where I grew up. Let's talk about the single moms choosing between rent and medicine, the schools where kids are tested on systems that were never built for them. The numbers don't live in spreadsheets, Miss Conway. They live in people." There it was, a shift in the air, like the moment a storm breaks and the wind suddenly dies. Kellyanne blinked, thrown for half a second. But she recovered. She always did. "You're emotional." Understandably. "But policy isn't personal, Congresswoman." That was her mistake. Jasmine stood, not quickly, not in rage, but with the slow, precise grace of someone who had spent her whole life turning pain into power. "You don't get to tell me what's personal," she said. "Because when I was 15, my uncle was arrested for a crime he didn't commit. My mother cleaned houses for people who looked just like you. I didn't have the luxury of separating policy from life, because life was policy, and for millions of people it still is." The chamber fell silent. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate, unsure whether to zoom in or give her space to speak. But she wasn't done. "You want to know how I'll pay for it?" she continued. "By ending the subsidies that go to billion-dollar developers while families sleep in cars. By taxing the corporations that ship jobs overseas and sell us bootstraps while cutting the laces. You call that radical. I call that reality." And then, Jasmine flipped the stage. She turned toward the crowd, not for showmanship, but for truth. "We keep having these hearings like they're games. Like it's about winning or losing. But every minute we waste in here, people are out there bleeding. And I won't apologize for bringing emotion into this room. Because you know what emotion is. It's the soul's way of saying I'm still here, and my community is still here." Even Kellyanne for a moment had no retort. But this wasn't just about policy or politics. There was more at play. Subplot 1 began months earlier, far from D.C. in the heart of Houston, where Jasmine had been mentoring a group of young black girls through a program called Future Voices. One of them, 13-year-old Aaliyah, had recently been hospitalized for asthma triggered by pollution near her school, an underfunded campus built next to a chemical plant. Jasmine had promised Alia's mother she'd fight for environmental justice, even as lobbyists tried to choke the bills she'd proposed. That promise weighed heavy even now. The committee hearing wasn't just a performance. It was a battlefield where Alia's future hung in the balance. Subplot 2 followed Kellyanne. While she stood firm in public behind closed doors, her daughter Claudia had grown distant. Tired of her mother's public battles and the private ones they never spoke about. The Conway home, once filled with ambition and discipline, had become a quiet war zone. Claudia had recently dropped out of college, citing anxiety and burnout. Kellyanne hadn't told anyone yet, not even her husband. Her heart was splitting down the middle, but she wore her mask like armor. And now, standing opposite Jasmine, she was beginning to feel the cracks. The hearing rolled on, questions were lobbed like grenades. Allies flanked their sides, but the true turning point came not from debate, but from silence. During a break, Jasmine found herself in the hallway, staring out a narrow window overlooking the Capitol. Her phone buzzed, a video from Alia. In it the girl smiled weakly from her hospital bed, holding up a hand, painted signs still breathing, still fighting. Tears welled in Jasmine's eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She just whispered, "So am I." Meanwhile, Kellyanne stood in a private room, staring at an unsent message to her daughter. "Claudia, I know I've hurt you by trying to save the country while losing you in the process." She hovered over the send button, then locked her phone away. When the hearing resumed, something had changed. Kellyanne returned not with an attack, but with a question. "Congresswoman Crockett," she said, voice softened, "you mentioned your community, your roots. I wonder if this committee were willing to re-examine funding mechanisms for your housing bill, would you be open to bipartisan amendments?" The room went still. Even Jasmine's aides paused, confused. Jasmine looked up, scanning for sarcasm. But none came. "Yes," she said after a moment, "if they're real, and if they're just." And with that, something rare happened. A pivot. Not a surrender, but a shift. Born not of calculation, but of connection. Two women, shaped by very different worlds, had collided not to destroy, but to reveal. The hearing ended with applause. Not thunderous, but sincere. Not for a victory, but for a beginning. Later that night, Jasmine walked alone down Pennsylvania Avenue, passing street musicians, food carts, and late-night runners. The Capitol glowed behind her. She thought of Alia, of her mother, of her uncle, of the countless unheard voices who had carried her here. Kellyanne, elsewhere, sat in her parked car outside her home. She finally hit send. The story didn't end there. Policies would be challenged, amendments fought over. But something had cracked open in both women, a vulnerability that politics rarely allowed. And for those watching, on C-SPAN, on Twitter, in living rooms across America, something else happened too. A reminder that even in the most combative rooms, there is space for truth. The life lesson was clear: power doesn't always lie in the loudest voice or the deepest pockets. Sometimes, it's found in the unshakable courage to speak with raw honesty, even when your voice trembles, even when your past weighs heavy, even when you're not sure if anyone's listening. Because when truth is spoken, not for performance but from pain, it doesn't just silence the room, it changes it forever.